The silence lasted 90 seconds. Councillor Vraxis of the Jathan sovereignty had orchestrated political campaigns that spanned decades. He had navigated coalitions involving thousands of species, each with their own agendas, their own ancient grudges, their own carefully calculated self-interest. He had learned to read the smallest gesture, the slightest shift in posture, the microscopic dilation of pupils across 100 different evolutionary paths. But he had never encountered silence like this. Ambassador Alara Stroud stood in the human delegation pod, a small platform barely adequate for 5 individuals positioned in the lower hemisphere of the council chamber among the newer species, the younger civilizations, the ones who had not yet earned the right to question. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back, her dark eyes reflecting the holographic light that announced humanity's judgment. Her expression carrying that quality Vraxis's cultural database identified as neutral, though something in the absolute control of her features suggested depths his database could not quantify. The chamber waited. Vraxis felt his chitinous faceplates shift involuntarily, a micro-expression his species displayed when encountering the unexpected. He suppressed it quickly, decades of political discipline overriding instinct. Around him, in the tiered delegation pods that stretched upward into the darkness of the 3-kilometer sphere, 12,000 species held their collective breath. Protocol demanded she speak. The human ambassador was required to respond to Resolution 7743 Omega, to protest, to plead, to rage against the decision that had just passed with 0 dissent, 0 abstentions, 12,000 affirmative votes declaring humanity a problem, species requiring immediate containment. 30 seconds became 45, 45 became 60. Vraxis's secondary eyes tracked the reactions cascading through the upper tiers, confusion spreading like ripples across still water. Ancient species who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations were shifting in their seats, their postures broadcasting discomfort in languages older than human written history. Still, she stood there. Finally, she moved. One hand came forward, a gesture Vraxis's database identified as a respectful bow, though the motion carried none of the subordination such gestures usually implied. It carried something else, something that made Vraxis's tertiary heart skip a beat without understanding why. Then she turned, walked toward the exit portal of her delegation pod. Each step measured unhurried final. Ambassador Stroud, High Arbiter Selene's crystalline voice resonated through quantum speakers embedded in every pod. The sound carried an edge Vraxis had rarely heard in 4 decades of council service. Uncertainty. The slightest tremor of something that might have been concern. Do you wish to address the council? Alara Stroud paused at the threshold. For a moment, Vraxis thought she might turn back, might deliver the kind of impassioned speech that young species were known for when faced with overwhelming opposition. The desperate appeals to fairness, to justice, to the supposed ideals the council claimed to uphold. Instead, she spoke without turning, her voice calm and clear through the chamber's audio systems, carrying to every corner of the massive sphere. No, High Arbiter, I think you've said everything that needs to be said. Then she was gone. The portal sealed behind her with a soft hiss that somehow carried more finality than any words could have conveyed. Vraxis stared at the empty human pod. Around the chamber, thousands of delegates began murmuring among themselves, some satisfied, others confused by the lack of drama. A few of the older ones, the ones whose species had survived through careful attention to details, others missed, sat in thoughtful silence. High Arbiter Selene's holographic form rotated slowly at the chamber center. The human delegation has withdrawn. This session is concluded. As the chamber began to empty, Vraxis remained in his pod, his 4 eyes fixed on the spot where Alara Stroud had stood. He had expected anger, defiance, the kind of primitive emotional response that would have validated every concern detailed in the resolution he had spent 6 months crafting. He had not expected calm. He had not expected silence. And something about that silence made him feel the way he had not felt in 160 years of political mastery. Afraid. 6 months earlier, the fear had not yet arrived. The Jathan Council Hall occupied the highest tower of Platform Sovereign 7, the administrative heart of Jathan space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the binary stars that had warmed Jathan worlds for 3 million years. The light cast long shadows across polished stone floors that had witnessed the footsteps of Jathan counselors for longer than most species had possessed written language. Vraxis walked those halls with the confidence of someone who belonged there. At 180 years old, he was in his prime by Jathan standards. His chitinous plates had darkened to the deep gray that commanded respect. His 4 eyes had lost none of their sharpness. His mind remained the most dangerous weapon in his considerable arsenal. He had spent 160 of those years building power, learning the systems, understanding the leverage points, mapping the invisible architecture of galactic politics with the precision his species was known for. The Jathan did not rule through force. They ruled through process, through procedure, through the slow accumulation of legal authority that eventually became indistinguishable from absolute control. And Vraxis was the finest practitioner of that art his generation had produced. The chamber he entered was smaller than the Grand Council Hall, more intimate, a private meeting room where the real decisions were made away from the theater of public sessions. His mentor waited there, Counselor Jevron of the Jathan of Primacy, 250 years old, plates so dark they were almost black, 3 of his 4 eyes clouded with age. He sat in the traditional posture of Jathan elders, his breathing labored in a way that spoke of time running out. Vraxis. The old voice carried harmonics that younger Jathan could not produce, frequencies that resonated with something deep in the evolutionary memory. You summoned me across 3 systems. I assume the matter is urgent. The human questioned Master Jevron. Vraxis settled into the seat across from his mentor. I have the votes, 12,000 species, unanimous consensus for containment. Impressive. Jevron's functioning eye fixed on him. 6 months to build such a coalition. Even for you, that is remarkable work. They made it easy. The humans have been impossible to ignore. Expanding too quickly. Refusing to conform to established trade practices. Maintaining military fleets that do not align with any recognized doctrine. Vraxis gestured his upper appendage, moving through the formal patterns of political discourse. 3 centuries in the galactic community, and they act as if they own equal space at the table. And so you will cage them. It was not a question. Vraxis felt his plates shift slightly, a micro-expression he could not suppress in his mentor's presence. Containment protocols, trade restrictions, diplomatic isolation, military monitoring at their borders, standard procedures for a problem to species designation. Standard procedures. Jevron's voice carried something that might have been sadness. Tell me, Vraxis, in your 160 years of building this system, this architecture of control we call galactic order, have you ever stopped to ask whether the cage you are building has walls on the inside or the outside? Vraxis's tertiary heart skipped a beat. Master, you are constructing a containment protocol for a species that has shown no actual aggression. Their crime is refusing to submit to authority they never agreed to recognize. The old Jathan's breathing rattled. You are building a cage, Vraxis. Be very careful you are not standing inside it. The words hung in the air between them. Vraxis wanted to respond, to defend the careful logic of his coalition, to explain the necessity of maintaining order, of preventing chaos, of ensuring that young species understood their place in the hierarchy that kept the galaxy stable. But something in his mentor's clouded eyes stopped him. The vote will pass, Vraxis said finally. The humans will be contained. Order will be maintained. Order. Jevron's voice was barely a whisper now. Is that what we call it? After all these centuries, is that still the word we use? He did not answer, could not answer. Jevron died 3 weeks later, his warnings unheeded, his final wisdom ignored by a student too certain of his own righteousness to recognize truth when it was offered freely. But the warnings had started earlier than that, 20 years earlier, to be precise. Vraxis stood in the medical bay of Platform Refuge 14, a Jathan colony station on the fringe of council space. The lights were too bright. The antiseptic smell of sterilization chemicals burned his olfactory sensors. And on the examination platform before him, Celira's body had already begun the cooling process that marked irreversible death. His wife of 90 years, mother to Tekram, their only son. Gone. The plague moved too quickly, counselor. The medical officer's voice was professionally neutral. Jathan physicians learned early not to show emotion when delivering bad news to the powerful. By the time we identified the pathogen, it had spread through 70% of the colony. We requested emergency medical aid from the council 6 days ago. The request was denied. Vraxis's claws dug into the edge of the platform. Denied, insufficient strategic value to justify the resource expenditure. Standard protocol for fringe colonies. The officer's plates shifted in what might have been sympathy or might have been fear. I am sorry, counselor. We did everything we could with what we had. Insufficient strategic value. His wife was dead because someone in the council bureaucracy had run the numbers and decided a fringe colony was not worth saving. Because the system he had spent decades building and defending operated on cold calculation rather than compassion. Because order mattered more than lives. Tekrim found him there hours later. His son was 75 then, already showing the tactical brilliance that marked him as Vraxis's heir. But in that moment, standing in the doorway of the medical bay, he looked young, lost. "Father?" Vraxis turned away from Salira's body, forced his voice to carry the harmonics of control. "She is gone, Tekrim. The plague claimed her with the others. But the Council could have saved them. The medical ships, the resources. The Council operates on established protocols. Resources are allocated based on strategic priorities." The words tasted like poison, but he spoke them anyway. "This is how the system functions. The system is wrong. The system is all we have." Vraxis moved toward his son, placed his upper appendages on Tekrim's shoulders in the traditional gesture of Jathan comfort. "We do not have the luxury of emotion. We have only the choice of whether to work within the order that exists or descend into chaos." Tekrim's four eyes met his. "And if the order itself is case, if the system that let mother die is the real disease?" Vraxis had no answer for that. So he buried the question along with his wife, buried his grief in work, buried his doubt beneath layers of political maneuvering and procedural mastery. He told himself that power was the answer, that if he climbed high enough, became influential enough, controlled enough of the system, he would never again be helpless, while those he loved died for lack of strategic value. He told himself that order was necessary, that the alternative was worse, that the cage he was building was for everyone's protection. He told himself lies for 20 years, and believed every one of them. The council chamber was a marvel of architectural intimidation. A perfect sphere 3 kilometers in diameter, its interior surface lined with delegation pods that stretched upward into darkness. Each pod held representatives from civilizations that had ruled stars when Earth was still cooling from its formation. The Zan primacy, the Velor dominion, the ancient gatherers of Proxima Tertius, species whose names carried the weight of 10 million years of galactic history. And today all of them were here to vote on the question Vraxis had brought before them. He stood in the Jothan delegation pod, positioned in the mid-tier, where species of significant but not absolute influence maintained their positions. His advisor Tekrim stood beside him, no longer the grieving son of 20 years ago, but a formidable political operator in his own right, 95 years old now, ambitious, brilliant, hungry for the power his father wielded. "The coalition is solid, father." Tekrim's voice carried quiet confidence. 6 months of negotiation. Every major power block aligned. The humans have no allies who will speak for them. Overconfidence invites failure. Vraxis's 4 eyes scanned the chamber. Until the vote is recorded, we assume nothing. Below them in the lower hemisphere, the human delegation pod held its small complement. 5 individuals representing a species that had been granted council membership only 2 centuries ago. A courtesy extended to species that showed potential. They had repaid that courtesy by ignoring half the council's regulations and questioning the other half. Vraxis focused on Ambassador Alara Stroud, 45 years old by human reckoning, unremarkable by most galactic standards, bilateral symmetry, limited sensory range, only 2 eyes, could not perceive half the electromagnetic spectrum without artificial enhancement, fragile. Yet she did not look fragile as she stood there, hands clasped behind her back, apparently unconcerned by the 12,000 civilizations preparing to declare her species a threat. High Arbiter Selene's crystalline form appeared at the chamber's center. Holographic projection, magnified to massive scale, visible from every pod regardless of position. The council recognizes Councillor Vraxis of the Jothan sovereignty. Vraxis stepped forward. His voice was amplified through the quantum network, reaching every delegation simultaneously. He had prepared this speech carefully. 6 months of preparation distilled into words designed to build consensus, to frame humanity's containment not as punishment but as necessary prudence. Honored delegates, ancient species and younger civilizations alike, we gather today to address a question that has grown increasingly urgent over the past 3 centuries. The chamber fell silent. Humanity has been a member of this council for 200 years. In that time, they have demonstrated remarkable adaptability, impressive technological advancement, undeniable ambition. He paused, letting the words settle. They have also demonstrated a consistent pattern of refusing to align with established protocols, of expanding into disputed territories without proper authorization, of maintaining military capabilities that exceed any reasonable defensive requirement. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the upper tiers. This is not about prejudice. This is not about fear of a new species finding its place in the galactic community. Vraxis's voice carried the harmonic frequencies of absolute conviction. This is about maintaining the order that has kept this galaxy stable for 40,000 years. This is about ensuring that younger species understand the boundaries necessary for peace. He gestured toward the human pod. I bring before you Resolution 7743 Omega, a containment protocol designed not to punish, but to protect, to establish clear parameters within which humanity can continue to develop while ensuring they do not destabilize the delicate balance we have all worked so hard to maintain. The words were lies, beautiful lies wrapped in the language of duty and responsibility. Lies that made the exercise of power sound like wisdom. Lies that Vraxis had become so skilled at telling that he sometimes forgot they were lies at all. I call for a vote on Resolution 7743-Omega. All those in favor of designating humanity as a problem species requiring containment protocols register your support. The holographic display at the chamber's center began its tally. 100 species voted immediately. Their positions had been secured through Vraxis's careful coalition building over the preceding months. Favors traded, threats implied, benefits promised, then 500 more, 1,000, 3,000. The tally climbed with inexorable momentum. Species that had been convinced humanity was a threat, species that benefited from maintaining the existing power structure, species that simply voted with the majority because that was how they survived in a galaxy where the ancient civilizations held all the real power. Vraxis watched the numbers climb, felt satisfaction war with something else, something he could not quite identify, a crawling sensation along his dorsal ridge that whispered warnings in Chevron's voice. You are building a cage. Be careful you are not inside it. He suppressed the thought. 12,000 species, 12,000 affirmative votes, 0 abstentions, 0 dissent. Resolution 7743. Omega passed unanimously. The holographic display shifted, showing the resolution's text in its full terrible clarity. Problem species designation, immediate quarantine protocols, trade restrictions, diplomatic isolation, military monitoring at all human control boundaries. Vraxis had won. 160 years of building power, 6 months of careful coalition building, and now the culmination, his greatest political victory, the moment that would cement his legacy as one of the finest political minds in Jathan history. So why did it feel like defeat? In the human delegation pod below, Ambassador Alara Stroud remained standing, hands clasped, expression neutral, and the silence began. 90 seconds, an eternity compressed into moments that felt like drowning. When she finally spoke those 7 words and walked away, Vraxis felt something break inside him. Some fundamental assumption about how the galaxy worked. Some certainty he had carried for 160 years suddenly revealed as fragile as glass. Tekrim appeared at his side as the chamber emptied. A successful conclusion, Father. The quarantine fleets are already moving into position. Yes. Vraxis heard his own voice as if from a great distance. Successful. But his 4 eyes remained fixed on the empty human pod, and the crawling sensation along his dorsal ridge had become a scream. 3 days changed everything. Vraxis stood in the Jathan Strategic Command Center, a facility that occupied the entirety of Platform Zeta-7. 300 analysts worked in tiered stations around a central holographic display that showed the entire galactic arm in perfect detail. Every ship, every station, every significant energy signature mapped in real time through a quantum sensor network that had taken 4,000 years to build. And on that display where human assets should have been scattered across 100 different systems, there was nothing. Empty space where trade convoys should have been. Vacant orbital slots where diplomatic stations should have been anchored. Dark zones where human research outposts should have generated their characteristic energy signatures. Explain this again. Vraxis's voice carried harmonics of controlled fury. Every word, every detail. The tactical officer, a nervous Velar youth whose bioluminescent skin patterns flickered with barely suppressed fear, manipulated the display with trembling manipulators. Counselor, as of 18 hours ago, there are 0 human assets beyond their designated quarantine boundary. Every embassy has been closed. Every trade agreement suspended. Every joint scientific venture terminated. Every observer post evacuated. They have withdrawn completely. Tekrim stood at Vraxis's side, his plates shifted in what might have been satisfaction. They are complying with the resolution. Complete submission, faster than any species in recorded history. No, the word formed in Vraxis's mind with absolute certainty, though he could not explain why. This was not compliance. This was something else. What about communications? Vraxis demanded. Silent counselor. The human diplomatic channels have gone completely dark. We have sent 17 formal inquiries through standard protocols. No response. Ambassador Stroud has not been seen since she left the council chamber 3 days ago. Vraxis moved closer to the central display, his four eyes scanning the red outlined sphere that marked human-controlled space. Approximately 12 light-years in diameter, centered on their home system of Sol. Surrounding that sphere in a perfect geometric pattern, 300 council enforcement vessels maintained their positions, enough firepower to sterilize a dozen planets. And inside that sphere, something was happening. Show me the energy readings. The display shifted, overlaying sensor data across the quarantine zone. What appeared made Vraxis's tertiary heart skip a beat. The entire human territory was illuminated with quantum signatures that spiked far beyond normal baseline readings for an industrial civilization. Massive energy expenditures. Space-time distortions in 17 different locations. Quantum fluctuations that suggested either experimental power generation or weapons testing on a scale that should have been impossible for a species humanity's age. Analysis. His voice was sharp enough to cut. A Zan science officer manipulated the display with its multi-jointed limbs. Counselor, these readings are unprecedented. We are detecting construction signatures consistent with heavy industrial activity. The space-time distortions suggest either massive power generation systems coming online or weapons platforms being activated. The quantum fluctuations indicate experimental technology operating at levels that exceed our current understanding. Which is it, power generation or weapons? We do not know, Counselor. Our sensors cannot penetrate deep enough. The humans have deployed some kind of interference field across their entire territory. Everything we are seeing is peripheral bleed-off. The actual sources are hidden. The crawling sensation was back. Stronger this time, urgent. They are building something. Yes, Counselor. The science officer's compound eyes reflected the holographic light in patterns that suggested profound confusion. Something large. But every time we attempt detailed scans, the readings become corrupted. It is as if what? The officer's bioluminescent patterns flickered through several emotional states before settling on what Vraxis's database had identified as profound unease. As if they are deliberately letting us see just enough to know something is happening, but not enough to understand what. Before Vraxis could respond, alarms erupted across the command center. The holographic display flared red in 3 locations along the quarantine boundary. Warning klaxons wailed. Analysts shouted reports across stations. And at the center of the chaos, 3 probe icons simply ceased to exist. Report. Vraxis's voice cut through the pandemonium with the harmonic frequencies that commanded attention. Counselor, we have lost contact with probe group Theta 9. 3 vessels conducting standard surveillance along sector route 773. All 3 just stopped transmitting. No distress calls. No weapons discharge detected. No debris field. They simply vanished from all sensors simultaneously. Impossible. The probes were equipped with quantum-linked beacons. Even if they were destroyed, obliterated down to the atomic level, the termination signal should have been instantaneous. The quantum link did not care about distance or obstacles. It operated on principles that transcended conventional physics. Those beacons could not simply stop existing. Send another group. Vraxis's claws dug into the edge of the command console. Heavily armed this time. I want real-time quantum feeds from every sensor they have. Tekrim stepped closer, his voice pitched for privacy. Father, perhaps we should request authorization from the full council before escalating. We are authorized. Vraxis did not look at his son. Resolution 7743 Omega gives us full discretion to monitor human activity. Send the probes. 30 minutes later, probe group Sigma 4 crossed the quarantine boundary. 6 vessels, each bristling with weapons and sensors. Their quantum communication arrays running at maximum capacity, flooding the strategic command center with data streams that painted a picture of empty space and strange energy, signatures bleeding from deeper inside human territory. Vraxis watched their feeds personally. 6 holographic screens arrayed before him. His 4 eyes tracking every fluctuation, every anomaly, every detail that might explain what the humans were doing in there. For 90 seconds, everything appeared normal. Empty space. Background radiation. The faint quantum signatures that mark the presence of something large and active deeper in human space. Then on the composite sensor screen, something appeared. The Zan science officer made a high-pitched sound of distress. a vocalization Vraxis had never heard from their species. Pure instinctual terror overriding rational thought. What is that? I do not know, counselor. The officer's manipulators moved frantically across the controls. The readings are not possible. That signature suggests a mass displacement of all 6 probe feeds went black simultaneously. This time, the silence in the command center was absolute. 300 analysts frozen, staring at screens that should have been showing live feeds from 6 heavily armed vessels, but instead displayed nothing but empty darkness. Status of probe group Sigma 4. The tactical officer's voice trembled. Gone, counselor, same as Theta 9. No debris, no distress signals, no termination alerts from the quantum beacons. They just stopped existing. 9 probes, billions of credits worth of advanced technology. Crews totaling 47 personnel from a dozen different species. Gone. Vanished as if they had never been there at all. Vraxis stood very still, his 4 eyes fixed on the holographic display where the quarantine boundary glowed red. Beyond that line in the darkness of human space, something was being built. Something that could make military vessels disappear without a trace. Something that generated energy signatures that defied known physics. Something that had been planned long before the vote 3 days ago. Get me a direct line to High Arbiter Silene, he said quietly, and prepare a message for the council. Tell them, he paused, the words catching in his throat. Tell them that the containment was already failing, that the humans were not cowering in their quarantine zone, but building something that made reality itself bend, that the silence of Ambassador Stroud had not been surrender, but a promise. Tell them we may have miscalculated. But even as he gave the order, a small part of his mind whispered darker truths. They had not miscalculated. The humans had calculated perfectly. They had let themselves be declared a problem, let themselves be quarantined, withdrawn every asset and closed every channel of communication. And now in the silence they had created, they were doing something that made veteran Jathan counselors feel fear for the first time in 160 years. The holographic display flickered for just a moment, so brief that Vraxis almost missed it. A flash of data across every screen in the strategic command center. Text in human script that Vraxis's translator rendered into Jathan harmonics. 3 words. Protocol Omega authorized. Then it was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Tekrim had not seen it. The analysts had not seen it. Only Vraxis, with his 4 eyes trained on the display, had witnessed the message that should have been impossible to transmit through their secured networks. He said nothing, just stood there in the strategic command center surrounded by 300 analysts and his ambitious son feeling the cage walls closing in. Not around humanity, around him, around all of them. And somewhere beyond the quarantine boundary in the darkness where 9 probes had vanished and energy signatures defied physics and interference fields, hid secrets that would reshape the galaxy. Ambassador Alara Stroud's silence finally made perfect sense. She had not needed to speak, because the humans had already said everything that mattered, not with words, but with 300 years of preparation that Vraxis was only beginning to understand. The vote had passed 3 days ago. The real game was just beginning. And Counselor Vraxis, architect of containment, master of political manipulation, builder of cages, and keeper of order, was starting to suspect that he had just made the greatest mistake of his 180 years. He had given humanity exactly what they wanted, a reason. The transmission arrived 72 hours after the probes disappeared. Vraxis was in an emergency session of the Security Council when every screen in the chamber went dark. The holographic display at the center, protected by 7 layers of quantum encryption and isolated from any external network, simply ceased displaying the tactical briefing that had been in progress. Then those words appeared, burning with soft blue light that somehow felt cold. You declared us a problem, we agree. Beneath them, a timer began counting down from 72 hours. High Arbiter Selene's crystalline voice fractured midword. How is this? The display expanded, replacing the message with something far worse. A human face. Not Ambassador Stroud. This was a man, late 50s by human reckoning, gray threading through dark hair, wearing a uniform that was simultaneously utilitarian and somehow intimidating in its simplicity. Clean lines, no ornamentation, just the absolute confidence of someone who did not need decorations to communicate authority. His eyes carried the weight of impossible decisions and their consequences. Members of the Galactic Council. His voice was calm, precise, the tone of someone delivering facts rather than threats. I am Fleet Admiral Theron Valen, Supreme Commander of the Human Defense Coalition. 3 weeks ago, you declared my species a problem requiring containment. We have given considerable thought to that designation. The display split. Valen's face remained on one side. On the other, a tactical map appeared, showing every council military installation, every enforcement fleet, every strategic asset deployed across 100 light years. Vraxis felt his blood freeze. That information was classified at the highest levels, protected by encryption that had never been broken, secured in networks that had been tested against every known intrusion method in galactic history. And here it was, displayed casually on every screen in the Security Council chamber, as if those protections meant nothing at all. We have concluded, Valen continued, his voice carrying absolute certainty, that you were right. Humanity is a problem, but not the kind of problem you anticipated. The tactical map began to change. Red icons appeared. Sun, thousands of them, scattered throughout council space like stars in a night sky, each one pulsing with a designation that made Vraxis's tertiary heart stop. Human stealth fleet position verified. Tekrim made a sound beside him. Not words, just a vocalization of pure shock. What you are seeing, Valen said, is the current disposition of human military assets. You will notice they are already inside your defensive perimeters. They have been there for 6 months. 6 months, before the vote, before the resolution, before Vraxis had even begun building his coalition. Your sensors never detected them. Your patrols never found them. Your intelligence services never suspected they existed. The Security Council chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouting questions, demanding explanations, calling for immediate military action. But Valen's voice cut through it all with the calm authority of someone who knew he held every advantage. Let me save you some time. Right now, some of you are thinking about activating your defensive networks. Others are considering a preemptive strike. A few are wondering if this is an elaborate bluff. The display shifted again, this time showing classified council military communications, planning documents, tactical assessments, contingency protocols, things that should have been impossible for outsiders to access, things that Vraxis himself had helped draft. This is your war plan for Scenario 773, human containment failure. Valen scrolled through documents with casual ease. Excellent work, by the way. The multi-vector encirclement strategy would have been quite effective. Would have been. Past tense. Would have been, Valen continued, because we have known about it since you finalized it 8 months ago. 8 months. They had been inside council networks for at least 8 months, reading everything, mourning everything, watching as Vraxis built his coalition and drafted his resolution and congratulated himself on his political mastery. Watching, waiting, planning. The display split into a dozen screens, each showing a different council facility, defensive stations, research outposts, communication hubs. And in each image, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, human vessels held position. Ships that seemed to bend light around themselves. That created sensor dead zones. That existed in spaces where the Council's most advanced detection systems saw only empty vacuum. Every defensive platform you have, Valen said quietly, every military installation, every strategic asset deployed within 50 light years of this chamber. We have eyes on all of them. We have weapons targeting all of them. He paused. Let the implications sink into minds that had just watched their entire understanding of galactic power dynamics collapse. And we have had them in position since before you ever voted on that resolution. Vraxis found his voice. Somehow, through the shock and the fear and the terrible certainty that his mentor's warnings had been prophecy. You are threatening the entire council, 12,000 species. Do you have any comprehension of what you are threatening? Valen's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, something colder, more dangerous. Counselor Vraxis, we are not threatening anyone. We are demonstrating. There is a difference. The display changed once more. This time it showed a single human vessel, sleek, angular, absolutely massive. Vraxis's tactical experience let him estimate its size, at least 15 kilometers long, bristling with weapon systems he did not recognize, surrounded by an energy field that made the space around it shimmer and distort. This is the HDCS Prometheus, Titan-class warship, kinetic quantum hybrid weapons platform capable of reducing a planet to debris in approximately 7 minutes. The image expanded, showing not one vessel but dozens, each one a leviathan that dwarfed anything in the Council's combined fleets. We have 47 of them. 47. Vraxis did the mathematics automatically. Tactical training overriding shock. 47 vessels of that class, each capable of planetary destruction in minutes, each equipped with weapons that operated on principles his species did not understand. The numbers were catastrophic. Your energy shields, Valen continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone giving a lecture, operate on principles you have used for millennia. Excellent technology, very reliable. Unfortunately, they were designed to stop energy weapons. Our kinetic systems bypass them entirely. The mathematics is simple. Relativistic mass times velocity equals more force than your shields can dissipate. Another screen appeared. Weapon test footage. A Council-model defensive platform, the kind that protected major installations throughout the galaxy, disintegrating as projectiles moving at appreciable fractions of light speed punched through its shields like they were not there. 7 seconds from first impact to complete structural failure. Your quantum communication networks. Valen gestured and another set of documents appeared. We cracked your encryption protocols 17 years ago. Every classified communication you have sent since then we have read. Every strategic plan, every contingency, every private conversation between delegates. He leaned forward slightly, and for the first time Vraxis saw something genuinely terrifying in those human eyes. Not rage, not hatred, absolute certainty, the look of someone who had already won and was simply explaining the results. We know all of it, Counselor Vraxis, including the private conversations you had with your dying mentor 6 months ago, including his warnings about cages and who might be standing inside them. Vraxis's claws dug into the armrest of his seat. They knew about Chevron, about the warnings, about doubts Vraxis had never shared with anyone. They knew about Celera. We know about your wife, Counselor, Platform Refuge 14, the plague that killed her 20 years ago. The Council request for medical aid that was denied due to insufficient strategic value. The words hit like kinetic rounds. Vraxis could not breathe, could not think, could only stare at the human admiral who somehow knew the most private pain of his life. We know that pain drove you to build power, to ensure you would never be helpless again, to create a system where you controlled enough to protect what mattered. Valen's voice softened, just slightly, just enough to make the words cut deeper. We know because we have been exactly where you are, watching people die because systems failed them, building power to prevent it from happening again. The difference, Counselor, is that we learned something you have not yet grasped. The display shifted one final time, showing the quarantine boundary, the energy signatures, the hidden construction, and something else, something that made Vraxis's 4 eyes widen in shock. Medical ships. Human medical vessels with distinctive Red Cross markings, humanitarian aid convoys bearing human insignia, engineering teams working in disaster zones the Council had ignored. For 3 centuries, Valen said, we have been watching, learning, and what we learned is that power without accountability is just another word for tyranny, that systems built on control rather than consent eventually devour everything, including those who built them. The medical ships were not new footage. The timestamps showed operations spanning decades, aid missions to fringe colonies, disaster response to regions the Council had written off as insufficient strategic value, medical interventions that saved millions of lives across species the ancient civilizations had deemed unworthy of resources. We know about Platform Refuge 14, Counselor, because we were there, 15 years ago, after the plague had already killed your wife and 40,000 others. We arrived too late to save her. But we saved the colony, the 40,000 survivors who lived because human medical teams deployed without Council authorization and worked for 6 months to eradicate the pathogen. Vraxis's vision blurred. The Jathon did not cry. Their species lacked the biological mechanism, but something in his chest felt like it was breaking anyway. They had saved his people, while he was building power to contain them, while he was drafting resolutions to cage them, while he was congratulating himself on his political mastery. They had saved the colony where his wife died. So yes, Counselor Vraxis, Valen said, and his voice carried something that might have been genuine regret. You declared us a problem, and now we are going to be one. But not the problem you imagined. The timer reappeared, counting down from 72 hours. In 3 days, humanity will present a set of demands to this Council. You will have exactly 72 hours to consider them. The demands are non-negotiable. His image began to fade, but his final words echoed through the Security Council chamber with the weight of absolute finality. Choose wisely, counselors. Because humanity is not asking permission anymore. We are informing you of a new reality. The transmission ended. Every display in every council facility across the galaxy went dark simultaneously, then returned to normal function as if nothing had happened. But in the Security Council chamber, nothing would ever be normal again. Vraxis sat in his seat, his four eyes staring at the empty holographic display. Around him, the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in stunned silence. And in his mind, his Chevron's voice whispered across 20 years and 6 months. You are building a cage, Vraxis. Be careful, you are not inside it. He understood now, finally understood. The cage had been built, and he was standing inside it. They all were. The emergency session began at midnight, Galactic Standard Time. In 40,000 years, the Council had never convened at such an hour. Tradition dictated that important matters waited for the light of civilized schedules, that chaos could be contained by procedure, that even crisis respected the calendar. Tradition died the moment Admiral Valen's transmission ended. Vraxis stood in his delegation pod watching the chamber that had been so orderly 3 weeks ago descend into pandemonium. Representatives shouted across the void between pods. Species that had not raised their voices in 1,000 years were screaming for immediate military action. Diplomatic protocols carefully constructed over Alenta collapsed under the weight of fear disguised as outrage. High Arbiter Selene's crystalline form rotated at the chamber's center, her faceted body reflecting light in patterns that conveyed barely controlled fury. This council will maintain order. But order was the one thing the council no longer possessed. We face an unprecedented situation. Silene continued, and Vraxis noted how carefully she chose her words. Not a crisis, not an attack, a situation. The Security Council recommends immediate activation of all defensive protocols, and the Security Council has failed. The voice came from the upper tiers. Counselor Threk of the Kruth Unity, a militant species known for solving problems through overwhelming force. His scales rippled with aggressive coloration visible even at this distance. They allowed this infiltration. They missed a human fleet operating within our borders for 6 months. I call for the immediate removal of the Security Council and full military mobilization. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber like a plague. Vraxis felt the weight of 12,000 gazes turning toward him. He had been the architect of Resolutions Heaven 743 Omega, the voice of certainty when the vote was called. The political mastermind who had built unanimous consensus for human containment. And now that certainty looked like catastrophic failure. Counselor Vraxis, Selene's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. You were instrumental in the original resolution. Surely you have analysis to offer regarding this development. Development, as if 47 planet killer warships and total intelligence penetration were merely an unexpected wrinkle in the plan. Vraxis stepped forward, his four eyes scanning the chamber. Tekrim stood beside him, plates shifted in a configuration Vraxis recognized. His son was preparing to defend him, to stand against the thousands who were looking for someone to blame. But defense would be a lie, and Vraxis had told enough lies for one lifetime. I am suggesting, his voice carried the harmonic frequencies of absolute conviction, though the conviction was different than it had been 3 weeks ago, that we look at reality. I have reviewed our military assessments, every analysis, every tactical simulation, every projection of possible outcomes. He manipulated his pod's holographic display, projecting his own calculations into the shared space where all could witness. In a direct military confrontation, the Council's probability of success is below 3%, and that assumes the humans have not understated their capabilities, which I strongly doubt they have. The chamber fell silent. Numbers had a way of cutting through rhetoric, and these numbers were a death sentence. Look at what we know. Their stealth technology makes them undetectable. Our sensors refined over 4,000 years cannot perceive their vessels until they choose to be seen. Their kinetic weapons bypass our primary defensive systems. Shields that have protected Council installations for millennia are meaningless against relativistic projectiles. Their intelligence penetration is total. They have read every classified document we possess. They know our plans better than we do. He gestured to the tactical projections, ship-to-ship comparisons, capability assessments, kill ratios that made experienced military strategists sick. Those Titan-class vessels, each one carries more firepower than our 20 largest battle groups combined. They have 47. We have nothing that can match them, nothing that can stop them, Nothing that gives us better than a 3% chance of survival if we choose military action. Then what do you suggest? The voice came from the Velar Dominion delegation. One of the oldest species, one of the most prideful. Surrender, submit to the demands of primitives who have been spacefaring for barely 3 centuries. The word hung in the air. Surrender. Vraxis looked at the Velar representative, at the ancient species around the chamber, at the power structure that had existed for 40,000 years and was now facing its first genuine challenge. I suggest, he said quietly, that we consider whether their demands are unreasonable. The chamber erupted, shouts of traitor, collaborator, species betrayer, words that should have wounded but instead felt like confirmation. Vraxis raised his voice above the chaos. Resolution 7743 Omega was always questionable. We declared them a problem not because they threatened anyone, but because they refused to follow our established order. We quarantined them for the crime of being unpredictable. And now, he gestured to the tactical displays, still showing the human fleet positions. Now we are shocked that they have responded by demonstrating exactly how much of a problem they can actually be. He pulled up Admiral Valen's demands, the list that had been transmitted along with the demonstration of human capabilities. They are asking for representation, for protection of marginalized species, for accountability in how we wield power. They are asking us to extend to younger civilizations the same rights the ancient species take for granted. His 4 eyes swept across the chamber. Are these really unreasonable demands, or are we simply angry that someone finally has the capability to enforce them? The silence that followed was different than before. Not agreement, not acceptance, but the first crack in the certainty that had ruled galactic politics for longer than human civilization had existed. Then Counselor Threk spoke again. The Kruth Unity will not submit. We propose an alternative resolution. Formation of a military coalition. 847 species who will stand against this human aggression. More voices joined, species pledging support, military assets, the building of resistance that Vraxis recognized from 100 political battles. Except this time he was not building the coalition. He was the target. High Arbiter Seleni's voice cut through the growing momentum. The Council recognizes the severity of this crisis. A vote is called on the removal of Counselor Vraxis from the Security Council, pending investigation into his failure to adequately assess the human threat. The vote was not unanimous this time, but it did not need to be. 7,000 in favor, 4,000 opposed, 1,000 abstentions. Vraxis felt the political power he had spent 160 years building evaporate in seconds. The networks, the alliances, the carefully constructed influence that had made him one of the most powerful individuals in galactic politics. Gone. Stripped away by the very system he had mastered, and somehow standing there in disgrace while thousands of his former allies abandoned him, Vraxis felt something he had not felt in decades. Relief. Tekrim's voice was quiet beside him, pitched for privacy in a chamber where privacy no longer existed. Father, they are destroying our legacy. Everything we built, everything you taught me. Vraxis turned to face his son, saw the fury there, the betrayal, the certainty that his father had failed him in the worst possible way. No, Tekrim, I am trying to save it. By collaborating with the enemy, by surrendering to their demands, by choosing truth over pride. Vraxis placed his upper appendages on his son's shoulders. The traditional Jothian gesture of comfort that suddenly felt inadequate. I spent 160 years building this system, and it was wrong. The humans are not the enemy, we are. We became the enemy the moment we decided that power was more important than justice. Tekrim pulled away. You are wrong, Father, and I will prove it. He left, walking toward the upper tiers, toward Counselor Threk and the coalition forming around military resistance, toward the certainty that Vraxis had once embodied and now recognized as poison. Vraxis watched him go, watched his son join the coalition that would lead the galaxy to war, and understood that some lessons could only be learned through pain. The quantum transmission arrived 6 hours later. Vraxis was alone in his private quarters, stripped of official position but not yet formally expelled from council facilities, existing in the liminal space between power and irrelevance. The message bypassed every security protocol, appeared directly in his neural interface as if those 7 layers of quantum encryption were meaningless, which he was beginning to understand they were. Counselor Vraxis, I would like to speak with you privately. No signature, no identification. Just an invitation and a set of coordinates that his navigation system identified as neutral space, 3 light years from any council installation. He should have reported it immediately. Should have alerted what remained of council security. Should have maintained the protocols that govern proper behavior even for disgraced counselors. Instead, he accepted. The quantum shuttle was waiting at the coordinates exactly as promised. Small, elegant, moving through space with a grace that suggested technology far beyond anything Vraxis had encountered. It docked with his personal transport without communication, without negotiation, as if his acceptance had been inevitable. The interior was designed for comfort without ostentation. Seats that adapted to Jathan physiology, atmospheric controls set to his preferred mixture, a viewport showing the stars sliding past at speeds that made his tactical training scream warnings about impossible acceleration. They traveled for 4 hours. When the shuttle finally slowed, Vraxis saw their destination and felt his breath catch. Unity Station, an orbital ring structure surrounding Earth, massive enough to be visible from the planet's surface, gleaming in the light of Sol like a crown of metal and purpose. It should not have existed. 3 weeks ago, there had been nothing in Earth orbit but standard defensive satellites and civilian infrastructure. 3 weeks to build something that should have taken years. Another demonstration of capability that made his scales itch with unease. The shuttle docked at a port that opened with precision timing. Vraxis stepped into a corridor that was simultaneously utilitarian and beautiful. No wasted space, no unnecessary decoration, just clean lines and efficient design that spoke of a culture that valued function over display. A young human woman waited there, uniform similar to Admiral Valen's, professional, respectful. Counselor Vraxis, Dr. Ashford is waiting for you in the observation deck. Please follow me. Dr. Ashford, not Admiral Valen, not Ambassador Stroud. Someone Vraxis had never heard of. The observation deck occupied an entire section of the station's outer ring, floor-to-ceiling transparent aluminum offering a view of Earth that stole whatever breath Vraxis had remaining. Blue and white and green, oceans and continents in weather systems spiraling across hemispheres. The faint glow of cities on the night side, beautiful in a way that defied the tactical assessment that wanted to catalog defensive capabilities and strategic vulnerabilities. Just beautiful. Counselor Vraxis, thank you for coming. The voice came from a man standing at the viewport, late 60s by human reckoning, gray hair, lines around his eyes that suggested a lifetime of difficult decisions. He wore civilian clothing rather than a military uniform. Simple, unpretentious, but his eyes carried the same certainty Vraxis had seen in Admiral Valen's transmission. I am Dr. Kenji Ashford. He turned to face Vraxis fully. Strategic architect of Protocol Omega. The man who designed what you are currently experiencing. Not Admiral Valen, not the military commander who had delivered the ultimatum. This was the mind behind it all. You are the mastermind. I am the architect. Ashford gestured to a seating area near the viewport. Please, we have much to discuss, and I suspect you have questions. Vraxis settled into a seat designed for Jathan physiology. Ashford took the chair across from him. Between them, Earth rotated slowly, indifferent to the conversation that might determine its fate. Why am I here, Dr. Ashford? Because you are the only member of the council who understands what we are trying to accomplish, and because I wanted you to see something before you make your final choice. I have been removed from the Security Council. I have no power to offer you, no influence to leverage. Whatever you hope to gain by bringing me here. I hoped, Ashford interrupted gently, to show you the truth about who we are, about what we are building, and about why we needed you to declare us a problem. Vraxis's 4 eyes narrowed. You wanted the resolution. We needed it. Ashford leaned forward. For 300 years, we have watched the council operate. We studied the patterns, the way younger species are marginalized, the way resources are allocated based on ancient prejudices rather than genuine need, the way power perpetuates itself through systems that claim to serve order but actually serve control. He gestured to Earth below. 40 years ago, I was 22 years old, a junior intelligence officer stationed at a fringe colony monitoring council activities in our sector. I watched as the council refused aid to an independence movement, not because the movement was violent or dangerous, but because it threatened the established order. His voice carried pain that 4 decades had not erased. I watched as council enforcement fleets crushed that movement, killed thousands of beings whose only crime was wanting representation in a government that claimed to speak for them. I watched and I understood something that changed the rest of my life. That the council was corrupt. That the council was old. Ashford's correction was subtle but important. Not evil, not deliberately cruel, just old. So old that it had forgotten why it existed. So comfortable in its power that it could not imagine alternatives. So certain of its righteousness that it had stopped questioning its own assumptions. He stood, moved to the viewport. Vraxis followed. We knew that eventually the council would see us as a threat. We were too unpredictable, too unwilling to accept status quo, too insistent on questioning the systems everyone else took for granted. So we prepared. 300 years of preparation. 300 years of building the capability to force change when the moment came. Because we understood something the council has forgotten. Change does not come through dialogue and debate when the powerful have no incentive to listen. Change comes from pressure, from force applied precisely, from demonstrations of capability that cannot be ignored. The viewport shifted, the view of Earth replaced by holographic displays showing Unity Station's interior. Not military installations, not weapon systems, medical facilities, research laboratories, manufacturing centers, educational institutions. This is what we built during your quarantine counselor. Not just weapons, not just the tools of war. We built infrastructure for the galaxy we want. Medical technology that can cure the plagues the council has ignored for centuries. Manufacturing systems that can solve resource scarcity. Educational networks that give younger species access to knowledge the ancient civilizations have hoarded. More displays appeared, showing operations spanning decades. Not recent projects, old missions, ancient history by human standards. Aid convoys to fringe territories. Disaster response in regions the council had written off. Medical interventions in places where council ships never went. Thousands of missions, millions of lives saved. 3 centuries of quiet humanitarian work while the council maintained order and ignored suffering. For 300 years we have been doing this. Saving lives the council ignores. Helping species the ancient civilizations deem unworthy of resources. Building trust among the marginalized and the forgotten. Not because we wanted to conquer them, but because we genuinely believe the galaxy can be better than what it has been. Ashford moved closer. You asked why you are here, counselor. You are here because we need you. The council is going to fight this. Your son is already building a military coalition. 847 species pledging to resist human demands through force. They are going to force a confrontation. And when that happens, we need someone who can bridge the gap between the old order and the new one. I have no power left to offer you. You have something more valuable than power. You have understanding. Ashford's voice carried absolute conviction. You understand how the council operates, where the corruption has taken root, which systems need to be dismantled and which can be reformed. You spent 160 years building the architecture of control. Now we need you to help us build the architecture of justice. Before Vraxis could respond, the observation deck door opened. 2 more humans entered. Admiral Theron Valen, the military commander whose transmission had shattered galactic certainty, and Ambassador Alara Stroud, the woman whose silence had started everything. Counselor Vraxis, Valen's voice was the same calm precision from the transmission. I apologize for the dramatic reveal 3 days ago, but we needed the council to understand the full scope of what they were facing. You wanted to terrify us. We wanted to demonstrate capability without actually using it. Valen's correction was important. Terror is a tool, but it is not our goal. Our goal is transformation. And for transformation to succeed, the old power structures need to understand they have no choice but to change. Alara Stroud moved to stand beside Ashford. Her expression carried that same unsettling calm from the council chamber. My silence was a strategy, counselor. Learned from studying your career over the past 30 years. You taught the galaxy that patience is a weapon. That strategic timing matters more than immediate satisfaction. That sometimes the most powerful statement is the one you do not make. She smiled, small, sad. I learned from you, Counselor Vraxis, from your tactics, your methods, your mastery of political manipulation. We studied everything you did, every coalition you built, every resolution you crafted, every time you turned the Council's own rules against those who threatened the established order. You studied me to defeat me. We studied you to become better architects than you were. Ashford's voice carried no triumph, just statement of fact. You built a system of control that lasted decades. We needed to build a system of justice that will last centuries. To do that, we needed to understand how systems are built, how power operates, How change can be forced when those in power refuse to change voluntarily. The displays shifted one final time, showing a vision of the future. A new galactic assembly, democratic representation for all species. Resource allocation based on need rather than strategic value. Medical aid flowing to fringe territories. Educational opportunities for younger civilizations. Justice instead of order. This is what we are building, counselor. Not an empire, not a conquest. A genuine galactic community where all species have voice, where power comes with accountability, where the mistakes that killed your wife do not get repeated for the 40,000th time. Vraxis stared at the vision, at the galaxy he had never allowed himself to imagine because imagination felt like weakness. And if the council refuses, if my son and his coalition fight you, Valen's expression hardened, then we will demonstrate the difference between capability and terror. We will show them what happens when force is applied precisely, without cruelty, without excess, but with absolute certainty. You will kill them. We will disable them. The correction was absolute. There is a difference, and that difference is everything. The Kruth Unity launched their attack 48 hours later. Vraxis watched it happen from Unity Station, standing in the observation deck where Ashford had shown him the vision of a better galaxy, watching holographic displays that showed 847 species making the choice he had feared: military resistance. Tekrim commanded one of the vessels, his son, leading a Jathan heavy cruiser in a coalition fleet that thought overwhelming numbers could compensate for technological disadvantage. The plan was simple, elegant even. Concentrate force on a single human supply depot on the quarantine boundary. Destroy it quickly before human reinforcements could arrive. Demonstrate that the Council would not submit. That resistance was possible. The Kruth fleet numbered 200 vessels, heavy warships carrying enough firepower to crack a moon, moving in perfect formation toward their target, confident in numbers, certain in purpose. Vraxis watched the tactical display with the detachment of someone who had already calculated the outcome. The human depot appeared to be lightly defended, a tempting target. Exactly the kind of installation a resistance movement would choose to prove their point. The Kruth fleet closed to weapons range, opened fire, and the depot disappeared. Not destroyed, not damaged, just gone, vanished as if it had never existed. And in the space where it had been 47 Titan-class warships decloaked, surrounding the Kruth fleet in a perfect geometric pattern, each one dwarfing the largest Kruth vessel, each one carrying enough firepower to reduce the entire fleet to atoms. Admiral Valen's voice transmitted on all frequencies. Kruth fleet, you have 60 seconds to stand down, power down weapons systems, and prepare to be disabled. You will not be harmed if you complicate. The Kruth commander's response was predictable. Defiant, brave, stupid. The Kruth Unity does not submit to, he never finished the sentence. The human kinetic systems fired. Not the devastating planet-killer weapons. Not the overwhelming force that could have vaporized 200 ships in seconds. Precision strikes, targeting weapon systems, engine cores, power generators, communication arrays, 200 ships, 12 seconds. And when it was over, 200 Kruth vessels drifted in space. Powerless, weaponless, completely disabled but structurally intact. Not a single casualty. Not one life lost. Perfect precision. Mercy delivered with overwhelming force. Vraxis's 4 eyes scanned the disabled fleet, found the Jathan heavy cruiser, Tekrim's command, drifting with the others, dead in space but intact. They could have killed him, could have reduced every vessel to debris, could have made an rampant that would have ended all resistance permanently. Instead, they disabled. They spared. They demonstrated capability without cruelty, and somehow that was more terrifying than any massacre could have been. Admiral Valen's voice transmitted again. Kruth fleet, human rescue vessels are approaching your positions. We will tow your ships to safe harbor. We will provide life support and medical care. And then we will release you. A pause. We could have killed you all. We chose not to. Remember that when you return to your governments. Remember that humanity's capability is matched by restraint. Remember that we are not the enemy you imagine us to be. The transmission ended, and across 847 species military commanders watched the footage and understood. Resistance was futile, not because the humans would destroy them, but because the humans would defeat them without killing them, would demonstrate superiority without cruelty, would prove that the only choice was submission or irrelevance. Vraxis stood at the viewport watching rescue operations begin. Human vessels moving among the disabled fleet, providing aid, offering assistance to those who had just tried to kill them. Ashford appeared beside him. Your son is safe. His crew is unharmed. We will return them to Council space within 72 hours. You spared him. We spared all of them. Ashford's voice carried neither pride nor satisfaction, just statement of fact. Because killing them would have made us conquerors. Sparing them makes us reformers. The difference matters. Vraxis watched his son's ship being towed by a human rescue vessel. Watched the coalition that had pledged to resist humanity receive mercy instead of destruction, and understood finally what Chevron had been trying to teach him. Power was not about building cages. It was about having the strength to open them. The vote is in 18 hours, Ashford said quietly. The Council will decide whether to accept our demands or continue resistance. What will you do, Counselor? Vraxis thought about Celera, about the 40,000 saved, about his son drifting in space alive because humans chose mercy over vengeance, about 160 years spent building systems that valued order over justice, about the choice between the galaxy he had helped create and the galaxy he had never allowed himself to imagine. I will speak, he said finally. I will tell them the truth. Whether they listen or not is their choice. Ashford nodded. That is all we ask. Truth. From someone they respect. From someone who has seen both sides and understands what is at stake. He turned to leave, paused at the door. For what it is worth, Counselor, I am sorry it took this confrontation to show you what we have been trying to accomplish all along. Then he was gone, leaving Vraxis alone with Earth rotating below and his son alive because humanity had chosen a better way. The countdown timer showed 16 hours remaining, 16 hours until the Council voted on whether to accept transformation or embrace destruction. 16 hours for Vraxis to decide whether 160 years of building the wrong thing could be redeemed by helping to build something better. He stood at the viewport, watching Earth, watching the rescue operations, watching mercy in action. And for the first time in 2 decades, Vraxis allowed himself to imagine a galaxy where his wife's death would never be repeated because someone had deemed her life insufficient strategic value. A galaxy where justice mattered more than order, where young species had voice, where power came with accountability. A galaxy worth building, even if it meant tearing down everything he had spent his lifetime creating. 16 hours, not much time to save a galaxy. But perhaps Vraxis thought, looking at the planet that had produced a species capable of this much patience and this much precision, perhaps it was enough. 4 hours remained when Vraxis returned to the Council chamber. The quantum shuttle had deposited him at the main entrance rather than the private delegation ports. A deliberate choice. Ashford's final gesture, forcing him to walk through the public corridors where counselors and aides and administrative staff could see the disgraced architect of containment returning to face judgment. Some looked away, others stared with open hostility. A few, the youngest ones, the representatives of species who had joined the Council in the last century, watched with something that might have been hope. Vraxis walked with his head high. His chitinous plates darkened to the deep gray of Jathan maturity. His 4 eyes focused forward. Each step measured, purposeful. The walk of someone who had made peace with consequences. The Council chamber was full. 12,000 species represented. Every delegation pod occupied. The upper tiers packed with ancient civilizations who had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. The lower tiers crowded with younger species who were still learning how power operated in a galaxy controlled by those who had ruled for millions of years. And in the center, the holographic countdown showed 3 hours and 47 minutes remaining. High Arbiter Selene's crystalline form rotated slowly, her faceted body reflecting light in patterns that conveyed barely contained tension. The Council recognizes that we face an unprecedented decision. In less than 4 hours, we must choose whether to accept the human demands or face the consequences of refusal. Her voice carried across the quantum network. This session will hear final arguments before the vote is called. Counselor Threk of the Kruth Unity stood in his delegation pod. His scales still rippled with aggressive coloration despite the defeat his fleet had suffered 48 hours ago. The Kruth Unity has witnessed human aggression firsthand. Our fleet was disabled, our sovereignty violated, our warriors humiliated. His voice resonated with fury, but we were not destroyed, and that fact reveals an important truth. The humans are capable of restraint, which means they can be resisted. They chose not to kill us because they fear the consequences of becoming conquerors. Murmurs of agreement from the upper tiers. I propose continued resistance, economic isolation, diplomatic pressure, a long-term strategy that forces humanity to maintain their occupation indefinitely. Eventually they will tire. Eventually they will make mistakes. And when they do, the Council will be ready to reclaim what is rightfully ours. More voices join, species pledging support, the building momentum of those who would rather die slowly than submit quickly. Silene's voice cut through the growing chaos. The Council recognizes Councillor Vraxis of the Jathian sovereignty. Silence fell. Vraxis had not requested recognition, had no official standing to speak, but Silene had granted him the floor anyway. Perhaps mercy, perhaps curiosity about what the architect of containment would say at the moment of its complete failure. Vraxis stood. 4 hours ago he would have remained seated, would have accepted his disgrace with the dignity of someone who knew when to retreat, would have let others determine the galaxy's fate while he faded into irrelevance. But 4 hours ago he had not yet seen his son's ship drifting in space alive because humanity chose mercy over vengeance, had not yet seen the medical facilities on Unity Station, had not yet understood what 300 years of patient preparation could accomplish. Honored delegates, ancient species and younger civilizations alike. His voice carried the harmonic frequencies he had perfected over 160 years of political mastery. I stand before you as the architect of Resolution 7743 Omega, the counselor who built the Coalition for Human Containment, the strategist who convinced 12,000 species that humanity was a problem requiring immediate action. He paused. Let the words settle. I stand before you as a failure. The chamber held its breath. 3 weeks ago, I believed I was protecting galactic order, maintaining the stability that has kept civilization functioning for 40,000 years, ensuring that younger species understood the boundaries necessary for peace. His 4 eyes scanned the thousands of delegation pods. I was wrong. I spent 160 years building power in this council, learning the systems, mastering the procedures, understanding how to navigate the invisible architecture of galactic politics. I became one of the finest political operators my species has ever produced, and I used that mastery to build a system of control that valued order over justice, that measured worth by strategic importance rather than the simple fact of existence. He gestured to the empty space where holographic displays usually appeared. 20 years ago, my wife died in a plague outbreak on Platform Refuge 14, a Jathan colony on the fringe of council space. The council denied our request for emergency medical aid. Insufficient strategic value, the assessment said. Not worth the resource expenditure required to save 40,000 lives. His voice cracked, just slightly, just enough to reveal the pain that 2 decades had not erased. My wife died because the system I had spent my life defending measured her value and found it wanting. And instead of recognizing that truth, instead of understanding that a system which allows such judgments is fundamentally broken, I buried my grief in work. I built more power. I told myself that if I climbed high enough, became influential enough, I would never again be helpless, while those I loved died. Silence. Absolute silence in a chamber designed to hold 12,000 voices. But power built on the foundation of injustice is just another cage, and I was standing inside it. The holographic display activated. Not at Vraxis' command, at Silene's, showing footage from 48 hours ago. The Kruth fleet attack. The human response. 200 ships disabled in 12 seconds. Not destroyed, not overstormed, not obliterated. Disabled with surgical precision that demonstrated capability without cruelty. My son commanded one of those vessels, Tekrim of the Jathan sovereignty. 95 years old. My heir, my legacy. He led a ship in that attack because he believed what I taught him. That order matters more than justice. That power is its own justification. That younger species need to be contained. Vraxis' voice grew stronger. The humans could have killed him, could have reduced every ship in that fleet to debris, could have made an example that would have ended all resistance permanently. They chose mercy instead. They disabled the fleet. They provided life support and medical care. They treated their attackers with more compassion than the Council has shown to species who simply asked for representation. He moved to the edge of his delegation pod, staring out at the thousands of species who would determine the galaxy's fate. I have spent the last 48 hours on Unity Station. I have seen what the humans built during our quarantine. Not just weapons, not just the tools of war. They built medical facilities capable of curing plagues the Council has ignored for centuries, manufacturing systems that solve resource scarcity, educational networks that give younger species access to knowledge we have hoarded. The display shifted, showing images from Unity Station, the infrastructure of a better future. And I learned that for 3 centuries, humanity has been helping species the Council abandoned, saving lives in regions we deemed too unimportant to aid, building a better galaxy while we maintained order. His voice carried across every pod. They saved Platform Refuge 14, 15 years ago, long after my wife died. They saved the 40,000 who survived, while I was building the coalition to contain them. Vraxis straightened, his 4 eyes blazing with certainty earned through pain. The humans have given us a choice: accept their demands for representation, accountability, and justice, or face the consequences of continued resistance. Counselor Threck argues we should choose slow resistance over quick submission, that eventually the humans will tire of occupation and make mistakes. He gestured to the tactical displays still showing human fleet positions. He is wrong. The humans will not tire. They have been preparing for this moment for 300 years. They have demonstrated patience that makes our ancient civilizations look impulsive. They will maintain their position for centuries if necessary. And while they do, they will continue saving lives. They will continue helping marginalized species. They will continue proving through action that they are not conquerors, but reformers. His voice resonated with absolute conviction. And eventually the younger species will realize that human occupation is preferable to council governance. That the cage we built to contain humanity is actually the cage we built to contain ourselves. That the real threat to galactic order is not human ambition, but our own corruption. He turned to face High Arbiter Selene directly. I call for acceptance of the human demands, not because I fear their military capability, though that fear is justified, but because their demands are right. Because the system we have built is wrong. Because 40,000 years of tradition built on injustice is just old injustice. Vraxis's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in the perfect acoustics of the council chamber, every word carried to every delegation pod. I am 180 years old. I have spent 160 of those years building power in a corrupt system. I choose to spend my remaining years building something better, even if it means tearing down everything I created, even if it means watching my son hate me for betraying the legacy I taught him to value. He met the gaze of 12,000 species. Vote to accept their demands, not because we have no choice, but because we finally have the courage to choose justice over order, to build a galaxy where beings matter more than systems, where younger species have voice, where power comes with accountability. Silence. Then from the lower tiers, a single voice. Young, uncertain, brave. A representative from a species granted council membership only 50 years ago. One of the marginalized civilizations that had never dared speak in full session. The Keth Unity supports Councilor Vraxis's position. We vote to accept the human demands. Another voice. Another young species. The Draxis Collective supports acceptance. More voices, building like a wave from the lower tiers upward. Species who had never had real representation suddenly seeing a chance for genuine change. But the ancient civilizations remained silent. The ones who held real power. The ones whose votes would determine whether the council transformed or died. High Arbiter Selene's voice carried across the chamber. The vote is called. All species in favor of accepting the human demands, register your support. The holographic display began its count. Vraxis watched numbers climb, slower than the unanimous vote 3 weeks ago, each species calculating costs and benefits, weighing pride against survival, choosing between the certain discomfort of change and the uncertain horror of resistance. 1,000 in favor, 2,000, 4,000. The count slowed, hovering just below the majority threshold. Ancient species holding position, waiting to see which way the political winds blew. The countdown timer showed 2 hours and 14 minutes remaining. Vraxis felt his tertiary heart skip. They were going to fail, going to choose pride over survival, going to force humanity to demonstrate that mercy had limits. Then a voice from the upper tiers. The Velor Dominion recognizes the strategic reality. We vote to accept. The oldest species in the council. The most prideful civilization in galactic history, voting to submit. The floodgates opened. Species that had been waiting for the Velor to commit suddenly found their courage. The count surged forward. 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. At 7,234, the majority was secured. The vote continued, species making their positions known, some supporting, others opposing, a few abstaining in the vain hope that neutrality would protect them. Final tally, 7,234 in favor, 4,622 opposed, 144 abstentions. Resolution 7743, Omega was rescinded. The human demands were accepted. The restructuring of the Galactic Council would begin immediately. The countdown timer stopped. 2 hours and 3 minutes remaining. Humanity had won, not through the overwhelming force they possessed, but through the patience to let the Council defeat itself. The message appeared on every screen simultaneously. Thank you for your cooperation. Restructuring protocols will be transmitted within 24 hours. Humanity looks forward to working with you to build a better galactic community. Simple, professional, utterly devoid of triumph. Somehow that made it worse. Vraxis remained in his delegation pod as the chamber emptied, watching thousands of species file out, some relieved, others bitter, all understanding that the galaxy had changed in ways that could never be reversed. Tekrim found him there. His son's approach was not the respectful stride of a subordinate seeking guidance. It was the aggressive posture of someone coming to confront betrayal. Father, one word, carrying volumes of accusation. Vraxis turned to face him. Tekrim, you destroyed us, everything we built, everything you taught me. His son's plates shifted through configurations that broadcast fury. Our legacy, our power, our position in the council. Gone, because you chose to collaborate with the enemy. I chose to stop being wrong. You chose weakness, surrender. You stood before the council and confessed failure like a criminal seeking mercy. Vraxis felt something break in his chest, not his heart's, something deeper, the connection between father and son, the legacy he had hoped to pass to the next generation. I stood before the council and told the truth, that the system we built was corrupt, that my political mastery was used to perpetuate injustice, that your mother died because that system measured her value and found it wanting. Mother died because the council failed, not because the system was wrong. The council is the system, Tekrim. They are not separate. And if the system allows the council to let 40,000 beings die for lack of strategic value, then the system itself is the disease. Tekrim moved closer, his voice dropping to the harmonic frequencies of private conversation. The humans used you. They showed you carefully selected images. They told you stories designed to manipulate your grief. They turned your pain into a weapon against your own species. They showed me the truth. They showed you what they wanted you to see. Tekrim's certainty was absolute, and you were too blinded by emotion to recognize manipulation when it happened. Vraxis looked at his son, saw himself 90 years ago, the certainty, the conviction, the absolute belief that power justified itself. You are wrong, Tekrim, but I cannot force you to see that. You will have to learn it yourself. I will prove the humans are not the saviors you imagine them to be. I will expose their manipulation. I will show the council that collaboration is just another word for surrender. And I will lead the transition council to build something better than what we had. Silence between them. Father and son, architect and an heir, standing on opposite sides of a divide that might never be crossed. You are not my father anymore. Tekrim's voice carried finality. My father was a master strategist, a political genius who built power through careful manipulation and strategic vision. You are just a broken old counselor who chose sentiment over strength. He turned, walked away, each step measured and final. Vraxis watched him go, felt the weight of 180 years settle on his shoulders, and understood that some prices could not be calculated in advance. But transformation had begun. The real work was just starting, and whether his son understood now or later, Vraxis would build the galaxy Celera deserved. A galaxy where no one else would die because someone measured their strategic value. 5 years passed. The restructuring was not dramatic, not swift, not clean. It was messy, frustrating, painful, exactly what real change always was. The Transition Council formed 3 months after the vote, Vraxis leading a mixed body of ancient and young species, working through the tedious process of dismantling 40,000 years of accumulated corruption. Some species withdrew. The Valor Dominion led 1,200 civilizations into the Free Sovereignty Coalition, rejecting the New Order, establishing their own governance. Humanity's response was characteristically patient. No military action, no sanctions, just open humanitarian corridors. Medical aid without political strings. Access to technology without demands for loyalty. Some FSC species quietly returned within months. Others took years. A few remained defiant. But the trend was clear. There were challenges. An assassination attempt in month 6. Ancient Jathan elders who saw Vraxis as a traitor. Human security saved him. Proved through action that the partnership was genuine. There was a crisis in month 9. A solar flare threatened 4 billion Velar lives. The FSC lacked resources for evacuation. Pride prevented them from asking for help. Humanity deployed anyway. 72 hours, 4 billion saved, 0 demands made. And Tekrim was on that rescue mission, watching human crews work without rest, seeing civilians treated with compassion despite their government's hostility. Understanding finally what his father had been trying to show him, he came to Vraxis afterward, not with words of apology, but with something more valuable: understanding. I saw what Mother would have received if humans had responded to Platform Refuge 14, he said quietly. I understand now. Father and son reconciled, not through grand gestures, but through the slow rebuilding of trust. Tekrim joined the Transition Council, learning to use political mastery for construction rather than control, building the legacy Vraxis should have built 160 years ago. The galaxy transformed. Medical networks reached fringe colonies. Resources flowed based on need. Young species gained genuine representation. Democratic processes replaced authoritarian control. It was not perfect, but it was better. And that Vraxis learned was enough. The Galactic Assembly convened for its inaugural session on the 5th anniversary of the vote. Not the Galactic Council. That name had been retired. Symbolic death for a system that no longer existed. The new chamber was designed differently. No tiered pods suggesting hierarchy. Just equal platforms in a perfect circle. 12,000 species. 12,000 equal voices. Vraxis stood at the speaker's podium. Elected democratically, chosen by species who had learned to value wisdom over tradition. At 185 years old, he was ancient by Jathan standards. His plates darkened to near black. 2 of his 4 eyes clouded, his voice carrying harmonics only the eldest could produce. But his purpose had never been clearer. Honored species, younger civilizations and ancient cultures alike. His voice resonated through quantum speakers. We gather today not to maintain what was, but to celebrate what we have built together. The chamber was full, but the composition was different than 5 years ago. Young species in positions of authority, ancient civilizations working alongside newcomers, human presence minimal, 80% withdrawn. The Titan-class warships decommissioned, stealth fleets returned home, partnership, not occupation. 5 years ago, humanity forced us to confront uncomfortable truths, that our system had become corrupt, that power without accountability is tyranny, that tradition built on injustice was simply old injustice. He gestured to the assembled species. We chose transformation, difficult, painful, slow, but genuine. We tore down systems that served only the powerful. We built structures that serve all beings. The holographic display showed 5 years of progress. Medical networks, resource allocation, educational access, democratic representation. We have made mistakes. We will make more. Transformation is not perfection. It is progress. Vraxis's voice softened. I spent 160 years building the wrong thing. I dedicated my remaining years to building something better. Not as penance, but as purpose. He paused. Today, I announce my retirement. 5 years is enough. Time for younger voices. Surprise rippled through the assembly. I nominate Tekrim of the Jathan sovereignty as my successor, not because he is my son, but because he understands what we were and what we are becoming. Because he resisted before embracing change. Because he learned that being wrong is the first step toward being right. Vraxis met his son's gaze across the chamber. Pride, love, understanding earned through years of working together. The humans are withdrawing, not because they failed, but because they succeeded. They forced change. They maintained pressure until transformation took root. And now they trust us to continue without oversight. The display showed human vessels departing, Valen retiring, Ashford writing history, Stroud consulting rather than commanding. They gave us a gift, the chance to become better than we were. Vraxis stepped away from the podium, his final act as speaker. The vote for his successor was unanimous. Tekrim, accepting with grace and humility, learned through transformation. Weeks later, Vraxis stood in Unity Station's observation deck, his favorite place, where he had first seen Earth and understood what was possible. Tekrim found him there, their evening ritual, discussing progress and challenges. The Velor formally rejoined today, Tekrim said. The last FSC holdouts. The coalition no longer exists. Good. Integration is better than isolation. The Jathan elders sent formal apologies. They want to teach true history in their academies. Vraxis felt warmth in his tertiary heart. Better late than never. They stood in companionable silence, watching ships move through space around Earth, civilian traffic, trade vessels, scientific expeditions, the normal activity of a civilization at peace. Do you regret it, Father? The power you gave up, the legacy you dismantled? Vraxis considered the question. 160 years of political mastery used for injustice. Celera dying because someone calculated her value. 40,000 saved by humans while he voted to contain them. 5 years spent building something worthy. I regret that it took 160 years to understand what mattered, but I do not regret the choice to change. Power built on corruption is just another cage. I spent most of my life inside it. These last 5 years, I have been free. Tekrim placed his upper appendages on his father's shoulders. Comfort. Respect. You gave me a gift. You showed me that being wrong is not permanent. That legacy can be rebuilt. That the greatest strength is the courage to change. Father and son stood together, watching a galaxy transform. Earth rotated below, blue and white and green, beautiful in its indifference to the dramas that had reshaped civilizations. Vraxis allowed himself to feel what he had not felt in 2 decades. Peace. Not the peace of power unchallenged, but the peace of purpose fulfilled. He had spent 160 years building a cage, and 5 years learning to open it. Not perfect, but better than what had been. And that, as he watched his son prepare to lead the galaxy forward, was enough. The holographic display flickered with a final message, visible only to those on Unity Station. The Council existed for 40,000 years. It took humanity 300 years to change it, and 5 years to make it work. Patience is the longest weapon. Vraxis read the words and performed the Jathan equivalent of a smile, a shift of plates that conveyed satisfaction earned through pain. His legacy was secure, not the legacy of power, but the legacy of transformation, worthy of Celera's memory, worthy of the galaxy she deserved. And in the end, that made all the difference.